Welcome to another edition of Hall of Fame Live, where we have another fantastic guest for you today. He is a former world number one, a four-time major champion, a two-time Davis Cup champion, and a member of the International Tennis Hall of Fame class of 2005. Coming to us from Orlando, Florida, Jim Courier, it is great to see you.
Hey, Blair, it's great to be with you. It's great to be with all of our Hall of Fame friends.
That's right. Well, Jim, as you know, this has been a tough time for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. How are you and how's the family?
Well, we are safe and sound in Orlando. We've been lucky health-wise thus far. Obviously, we're very cognizant, and you can't help but be cognizant of the serious stresses that the world is experiencing right now. So we're aware, we are active, but we are certainly trying to stay COVID-free, and so far so good. How about you? How's your family doing?
Hanging in here in Texas. Thank you for asking. But Jim, as you know, if things were normal, quote unquote, right now, we would be a few days off the men's final at Roland Garros. As a two-time champion there, do you have a favorite memory other than maybe hoisting the trophy?
Oh, there's so many to choose from. I came back as a fan. I'm not working on television many years ago and got to watch the Big Four play in the semifinals. That was magical, just sitting on the side. Getting to go back each year and experience the tournament from a different lens, from the the very, very high up in the broadcast booth. You see things at a different level. So I love being in Paris in general. I've missed it dearly here in recent weeks, but I'm optimistic that we might get a chance to see some Roland Garros tennis this year, and I'm hopeful we will.
As am I, and probably all of you watching. And if you are watching us live today, you know the drill. Now is your chance to leave a question for Jim in the comment section, and we are going to get to as many of those as possible. But Jim, since we're talking about social media, I feel compelled to maybe ask you the most pressing question today. Will we ever see Jim Courier on social media?
I was on social media at the onset of Twitter when we were just starting with our Champion Series tour, and I was given an account by our PR person, Randy Walker. I used it for about 6 months before I realized it wasn't for me. So personally, I'm anti-social media as far as putting any information out, although I do use it as a news source.
Makes sense. Well, you're probably ahead of the game and probably waste less time than the rest of us, but we do appreciate you joining us on social media today, Jim. And I'd love to sort of start things off with a little quick fire segment. We're going to call it First Thoughts. You obviously have an incredible breadth of understanding and information in the world of tennis. So I'm going to give you a topic and you can give me your thoughts on said subject. Sound good?
I'm ready.
All right. First one was not on my list 24 hours ago. Roger Federer, news that he is out for the rest of 2020. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, disappointing for all of us that love seeing Roger. Concerned that he had to have a second surgery on his right knee. He's shown historically he does have the ability to come back quickly without needing a lot of tournament play to be sharp. So he'll be trying to do that again, hopefully next year at the Australian Open. But it's a long time off. He's never had this much time off before. But he's Roger. Anything's possible with him.
That's for sure. Okay, possibility of the U.S. Open without fans, with travel restrictions, with I guess restrictions as well on team size. Yeah. A lot of top players maybe not super thrilled about that concept. What are your thoughts?
I think if we can play this tournament, we need to. I think it's really important for the health of tennis to stay in front of people. Other sports are opening right now. The PGA Tour starts tomorrow in your hometown of Fort Worth. I think even if we don't have all the players, we're obviously not going to have Roger. I think we still need to do our best effort to do it safely, to show a pathway for tennis to resume. There will be lessons that we can learn from that. Maybe the French Open can then apply if they're able to play. And it's just too important for the jobs for the tennis community that if it can get played, and that's going to be determined not necessarily just by the USTA, but potentially New York State and New York City. But I think if we can, we have to.
Good stuff. All right. Thoughts on an ATP WTA merger?
It's been a long time coming, and it would go a long way towards helping the business side of things with leverage. We've already had so many tournaments together. Hopefully, whether this happens or not, I think that is the direction we're headed. I know the ATP CEO, Andrea Gaudenzi, wants more big tentpole combined events. So even if we don't come together for one organization, I think it still makes sense to try and do as much possible together. But obviously, if you're a forum and you're speaking with one voice, you carry a lot more weight when you walk in and ask a company to sponsor tennis.
As a former player and captain, what are your thoughts on the new Davis Cup format?
It's too early to tell, and this year is going to be very, very challenging for them to pull off something that will be successful. But I feel like Davis Cup needed to make some changes. There's a bit of a problem because you have the ATP Cup, which was amazingly successful, and you've just got Laver Cup as well, which has been an incredible success. So it's a crowded field, but I still think that Davis Cup has a chance long term to get it to a place that it can be very viable and right. And hopefully be as powerful as a Grand Slam.
Finally, Jim, your thoughts on the GOAT debate? Worth having?
I mean, why not? There's no right or wrong. I mean, it's just opinion-based. And I think it's certainly on the men's side premature to have, but it sure is fun, and we do a lot of it. So I say go for it.
Good stuff. Thank you so much for that. Always great to hear your thoughts. We want to get into the meat of your tennis story, and I want to start at the very beginning. How old were you when you first picked up a racket, and what sort of led to that?
I mean, according to my parents, I was probably 3, 4, or 5, somewhere in that range, because they would just go play with their friends, and my sister and I would eventually want to play with them. We get tired of playing on the jungle gym. So I think somewhere in that range, I was, we didn't have a kid's racket. I was dragging around a wood racket at the time, and that's how we got started. Yeah, early.
How old were you when you decided that professional tennis was a possibility?
So, I started playing tournaments when I was about 7 and national tournaments at 12. By the time I was 14, I could see that there might be a chance that I could compete. And that's when I made a decision to take the offer to go on a scholarship to Bollettieri. And that was really a dividing line moment for me.
I want to talk more about that a little bit later, but first, when you were 14, around that age, who were your tennis inspirations? Who did you look up to?
Bjorn Borg was my biggest inspiration. I mean, quite simply, when you're coming up in the late 70s, he was number 1 in the world. He's winning Wimbledon and the French Open every year, so it's easy to look to the best. Mm-hmm. And then as we got going, and the Americans with Connors and McEnroe were in the picture, my parents didn't particularly like the way they behaved, and they wanted to redirect me away from that. And so they pushed me on to Bjorn as well. I see you're rocking the big patch Fila.
That's right.
For Bjorn. So he was kind of the guy that I tried to act and play like, and I failed miserably at both of those.
I don't know about that, but you did mention your time at Bollettieri's gym, obviously a big part of your development in your teenage years. There's one bit of that story that interests me particularly, and that's the thought of you and Andre Agassi rooming together, even if it was for a short time, when you were in such direct competition with each other for many things on many different levels. What was that like?
Yeah, so it was daunting for me to come to Bollettieri's in January. So most kids come in September at the end of the summer for school year. I came in mid school year, so everyone sort of picked their teams, if you will, in the room. So I was sort of the odd man out. Andre had 2 other guys from Las Vegas that were living in that room as well. So I certainly felt like there was a gang that was sort of already set, and I needed to try and find a way to fit in. And then you're trying to get Nick's attention. You're trying to get the attention of the 27 girls, with 100 guys there. You've got all that stuff. So it was an interesting time. I learned a lot about myself, and we came through it all right on the other side.
Sure. What was it like to then play Andre at the tour level? You have a 7-5 career record over him. Did you sort of take that Bollettieri history with you onto the court every time you faced him at the tour level?
I don't know that the Bollettieri history had as much to do with it as the fact that we're the same age, and I'd seen him since he was 11 years old, and he'd seen me, although he was probably paying less attention to me at that age because I wasn't as good as he was. But there's a comfort level, Blair, in playing a peer as opposed to someone who is an icon that you've watched growing up on television who seems larger than life. So there was always at least the knowledge that I've seen this guy in his underwear. We're 14 at Bollettieri's, and I've seen him put his pants on just like I do. So, there wasn't that overwhelming awe of someone who was as great as Andre was.
I like that. It's the literal visualization of seeing the crowd in their underwear, right?
That's it. That's what happened.
All right, Jim, 1991 to 1993 were absolutely eye-popping years for anyone watching your career. 7 major finals, 4 titles. And from what I understand, that first title at Roland Garros in 1991, You may have seen that coming, but not a lot of other people did.
Yeah.
What clicked for you during that time?
Well, that was a year of, I'd made a big jump early in the year. I'd gone from about 25 in the world to the top 10. I'd won in Indian Wells and Miami. And so that sort of changed the way that I looked at my chances going into a major. And I didn't have a great clay court season coming in, but I had a good week of preparation with Jose Higueras. I just started working with Jose and Brad Stein and Pat Etcheberry, who were sort of my gurus that transformed my career. And so we went in, and I figured I had a reasonable shot. I'd made the fourth round the last 2 years of Roland Garros, so I was comfortable playing on the red clay. And I was seated somewhere around 8. And I just went in there going, I'm going to play my way. I'm going to see how it goes. But I've beaten a lot of these players that I'm facing along the way. I faced Stefan Edberg. I'd beaten him a few times. And eventually I faced Andre in the final. I'd beaten him before. So, again, it wasn't as daunting as it could have been if I'd have played someone like Yvonne Lendl, who I hadn't beaten and was so great on the clay.
You mentioned Pat Etcheberry, who was a strength and conditioning coach at the time. I know what everybody says about your work ethic. I think it probably still holds true today, certainly from what I've seen. How miserable were those workouts for you? They had to be brutal.
Yeah, so Pat Etcheberry certainly made sure that we worked hard. All of us that got to work with him, he demanded that kind of effort and energy if he was going to spend his time with you. And I ate it up. I loved it because I knew that I needed to take my fitness from an 8 to a 10, and he was going to be the one to help me do it. So I wasn't afraid of the work. I certainly suffered, and I suffered a lot. But I knew that there was something to be gained from that suffering. I knew that there was value there. So that's what drove me. It would be really tough to know that you were suffering for no upside, but I knew that this was at least going to check the box of something that couldn't be taken away from me.
Love that. All right, we have a fan question for you, Jim. This is from Sue on Facebook. Who was the toughest opponent during your career?
So the toughest opponent for everyone in the 90s was Pete Sampras. He was an incredible player, had great records against all of his major rivals, just so difficult to beat, a player who gave you no rhythm. His first and second serves, unreadable, incredibly precise, so much confidence in those shots, and he could make it really uncomfortable, and he certainly did for me. So, I got a few wins against Pete, but he gave me a pretty good hiding overall.
You have talked about Jim Lehrer's role in your career. Those of you who follow tennis know Dr. Jim Lehrer, obviously an incredible performance psychologist. Were there any nuggets that he gave you as a player that you still sort of hold to today? Anything that you can share with us?
Well, I think Jim was one of the first people in the field, and we were lucky to have him in tennis. One of the first psychologists to focus on sports. And one of the things that I've always taken away from that is the rituals. He gave me, and probably so many others that he's worked with, something to do on those in-between point times where your mind can wander and you can lose sight. And he gave me a specific regimen to do to make me stay focused. So he helped me hone my concentration. And Doc has always been a great resource just to pick up the phone and to call if you have a problem like anyone else might have a problem. And he's done so much amazing work for people like me that you might know that he's done the work with, and so much more that's been covert. So many top players have reached out and spent time with him, and he doesn't talk about it, and neither do they, but he's an amazing human being.
How important do you think it is for a tour player then or now to have somebody helping them in that department?
Look, I think not every player necessarily needs it. I don't know if someone like Rafael Nadal works with a sports psychologist. He might, not sure. But I think that, again, there's no stigma to it. I think initially people were a little hesitant to talk about it because they thought it indicated weakness or mental weakness, but it doesn't. It's certainly just a part of your makeup as a human being, let alone being an athlete. Mental health is crucial. And tennis, as you know, Blair, it's a highly stressful endeavor. You're out there by yourself. And to have tools to cope with those stresses is really important.
All right, we had another fan question, Jim, coming in live. We're going to really switch gears here. This is from Brandon Lichtman. He's asking, do you have dreams about walking onto center court in a final? Who are you playing, and what's the result, if so?
That's funny. I don't have a ton of tennis dreams, but occasionally I have those types of dreams that people have where you didn't study for a final. So I've had dreams in recent months where I've been in like the Australian Open, and all of a sudden I'm in the field instead of working in broadcasting, and I haven't been practicing. I'm not fit, and you have these panics that, oh no, I have to go out and play it. You're playing against the real tour players now, and you just know you're not even close to ready. But it's just sort of amusing how your brain, all of our brains work, and that it pulls from different pieces of your life. But those same fears that all of us sort of have of not being prepared, I think they're just there.
Well, good stuff. Thank you, Brandon, for that question. Jim, I want to talk about Davis Cup, of course. In particular, as I was sort of doing research here, I came across a picture of the 1992 championship team, yourself, Andre Agassi, Pete Sampras, and John McEnroe, 4 players who have been #1 in the world. Tom Gorman was the captain at the time. What was the dynamic like on that team?
Yeah, it was really interesting to get the 4 of us plus Gore, the captain, all pushing in the same direction, because we were very much at that point trying to take things away from each other in the majors. So, but we came in, everyone arrived the same day. We would get there on the Sunday before, and we'd start practicing. And we would be working together and playing doubles against each other, and then practicing in singles. So there was really, really good energy and intensity and focus on trying to achieve something together. We only did it twice. We did the semifinals and then the finals. And the finals was a really strange week, because that was the week that the news broke publicly that Johnny Mack and his first wife, Tatum O'Neal, were breaking up. So there was a lot of the extra TMZ type media staking out the hotel, and that put John in a pretty foul mood. So it was a very tense week overall. So it wasn't the first week. The semifinal was, I think, a lot smoother on many levels, just because of the circumstances. But it was a real honor to be on a team with those guys.
I hear you had a really good hitting partner that year as well, in possibly Todd Martin, CEO of the International Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I mean, Todd was a great Davis Cup player in his own right, but he was on his way up, and we were lucky to have Todd. We had Luke Jensen helped us out along the way, Richie Renenberg. I mean, you're talking about players that are just fantastic tennis players, but that's the luxury that American men's tennis had in the 90s.
All right, another fan question from Jacob on Instagram. I'm going to paraphrase this. He's asking about the first round Davis Cup tie against Russia in 1998, when you clinched it, lost the first set to Marat Safin, I believe 6-0, came back to win it in 5. Tom Gullickson then has the best reaction, single-handed hoist up to the shoulder. What do you remember about that?
Well, I remember that Safin was like this 18-year-old wonder kid who had so much firepower, and we didn't know a lot about him, but he put a beating on me in that first set that I don't think anyone has done before or since. I had no chance. He was hitting aces, hitting winners off of my serves. I just felt helpless. And Gully and I were able to come up with a different game plan. I started slicing my backhand exclusively, and that changed the course of the match. And that's one of the benefits of, in Davis Cup, having that captain, that sounding board there. You can bounce a few ideas off, and we're able to turn that thing around and win it in 5. That was the 5th match too. So that was very, very special to be a part of that one. And I definitely remember Gully putting me up on his shoulder.
It was an impressive feat of strength there. I love it. All right, next question, also a fan question coming in live from Patrick. What was it like to play Pete in the Wimbledon final? And was there a belief that you could have beaten him in 1993?
Yeah, first and foremost, I was shocked that I was in the Wimbledon final. I was not a good grass court player, in spite of the fact that I made that final. I had a pretty tough record at Wimbledon. The grass then was very different. I felt like I had to serve and volley a lot. I didn't serve and volley as much in 93 because it didn't rain the entire fortnight. So the courts were a bit firmer. But I beat Edberg. I was sure he was going to beat me in the semifinals, and I beat him. And so I was sort of just almost playing with house money in a way. But I was disappointed that I played. I don't think I could have played any better, Blair, in that final. I played as well as I could play, but Pete was just a better player in general than me, and certainly on grass. And he toughed me out in 4 sets. But it was an awesome experience. It was literally the only year that my entire family came to Wimbledon, and they came for the whole time. So that was a pre-planned thing, and that was the year that I actually did pretty well instead of losing the first round like I did a lot.
Very cool. All right, another fan question from JoJo on Facebook. Who do you think plays like you amongst the current players?
Who I think plays like me? I think there's a player that looks like me that plays like me, and Kyle Edmund. He's a player who's, he's got a really big forehand, a pretty heavy serve. His backhand is solid, but not a shot that you worry too much about. And he's got a good attitude. So I look at the way that he plays, and I feel a lot of kinship.
All right. Induction weekend. Another shift of gears. This is one of my favorite questions to ask in our Hall of Fame live segments, because you can sort of feel the emotion relived. But what was that like for you? What do you remember most about that experience?
Well, it was an amazing week because so many of my family and friends were able to enjoy it. We're all together. So it was a great sort of gathering, if you will, almost like a reunion. My coaches and everyone who's sort of had a hand in my career, for the most part, was there. So it was spectacular. You're there, Newport. It's a magical place, a magical energy. I went in with a great crew, Yana Novotna, Butch Buchholz, and Yannick Noah. So it was a wonderful group with high energy and a lot of positivity. So nerve-wracking. Also, give the speech is nerve-wracking. And here's a little tidbit too. So Bud Collins, who was the host then, as he introduces, or calls me up to the podium after Gully introduced me, a couple of the prior inductees had gone a little longer with their speech. You're only supposed to go like 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. And so Bud, as I'm walking up to the podium, goes, "Jim, TV's about to go off. You got to do this in 2 minutes." So that threw me for a little bit of a loop because I had to self-edit pretty quickly, in the moment. But what I figured was there's also a dinner that night, which is not televised, but all my people were going to be there, so I could have the extended speech then, which is what I did. So it was a little extra curveball. Bud was always good at the curveball questions. That was a nice little curveball.
Well, you handled it like a champ, as you do on TV so many times since then. But you did say in that induction speech something I thought was interesting. You said tennis didn't force you to give up your childhood. In fact, it gave you so much later on. We're going to take a little look at that clip, and then I want to ask you about it.
Okay. People ask me, what kind of sacrifices did you have to make? What was it like giving up your childhood? I didn't give up my childhood. I got to do everything that I wanted to do as a result of following tennis.
Need to hear your perspective there, Jim. We hear such different origin stories from player to player. Do you think what you explained in that clip about how you felt like tennis gave you everything and you loved the process, do you think that's how most of your contemporaries felt? Do you think that's the overriding sentiment in the locker room?
I think that's why I felt compelled to share that side of my story, because I know for a fact that's not the case. You can read Andre's book, Open, his brilliant autobiography, and see that his childhood was, in his view, taken away from him. And some other players will have that feeling as well. But I was fortunate that my parents supported what I did, and it was what I wanted to do. And I never regretted missing prom or parties or weekends with friends because we're out playing tournaments, because I love to play tennis, and that's what I really wanted to commit my time and energy to. And it was my choice. And that's the point that I was trying to make. And because I know there are so many maybe more publicized examples of tennis players who didn't get lucky enough to live that type of existence.
Also in that speech, you talked about wanting to pay it forward because so many people had given you opportunities along the line. What's the most meaningful way you feel like you've been able to do that since then?
I think charity is the way that tennis is so good at ingraining to pay it forward in you. So whether it's been through Courier's Kids, which is a foundation that we founded, which supports after-school tennis programs here in Florida, or participating in other my peers' other charity events to help them raise money for their projects that they're doing. I think one thing that tennis has been consistently good at, and we saw it again with the bushfire relief in Australia this year, the players know that when it's time to give back that they do. So I'm proud to be a part of that heritage of tennis players, be it doing their part when they can.
So you've given back to others in so many ways, but what did tennis give to you in terms of life skills and life lessons?
Well, I think independence. I think learning how to handle tough moments, because in tennis, you don't win every match, and you have to learn how to deal with that. So I think a lot of figuring out how to take setbacks, learn from them, and move forward. Goal setting, good health. Tennis requires good health if you're going to play it at a good level. You're going to be fit. And I think the sportsmanship angle of understanding that when we're done, while we may not shake hands on a go-forward basis, we may tap rackets, but we're going to acknowledge the person that we've battled with or the people that we've battled with if we're playing doubles. So there's so many amazing elements that I'm missing a lot of them, but those are kind of a few bullet points, if you will, of what tennis, I think, just ingrains in those of us lucky enough to play it.
Post-tennis, you founded Inside Out Sports and Entertainment, launched the Champion Series events that so many of us know and love. What has it been like to stay in touch with those players who play in those events? Obviously, it's nice from the business side, but you're also sort of in the mix with the people that you played with. Yeah,
again, I go back to that word reunion. It's a chance for those of us who live so much of our lives together in locker rooms around the world in a traveling circus environment. We get to put the band back together. Albeit for a couple days here and there, and we get to do it in great places. We've played so many times. In Newport, you've been nice enough to help us out and make us look good on TV, and we appreciate that. But I think it's been amazing to be able to keep that connection with my peers.
What's the banter like?
Oh, it's extreme. It's extreme in a good way, but it's really fun when you get guys like James Blake and Marty Fish and Andy Roddick, who are like their own little fraternity, and get those guys going at each other. That's really fun to hear them cracking at each other.
Yeah, it's fun for the fans as well. I've been on that end of things. But Jim, you have done so much work as a commentator, as an analyst. In fact, it was hard to find a network that you have not worked for at one point or another. But people cannot get enough of your on-court post-match interviews at the Australian Open. And as someone who does a lot of that myself, I have to ask, are you as relaxed as you look out there?
No, not even close. I'm stressing the whole time. Aren't you stressing the whole time?
Oh, absolutely. You never know what's going to happen.
Well, look, you look super relaxed and happy right now, but you have the hard job here. This is an easy seat to be in. So when I'm in your seat and asking the questions, which doesn't happen often, I have a huge amount of strain and stress because, you ask the question the wrong way, you can really get some rough responses from players. So, I'm cognizant about trying to make them comfortable, trying to ask them pertinent questions. And if they're in a good mood and it's been a quick match, then you can ask them questions that are a little bit offbeat. But if it's 7-5 in the third or 7-5 in the fifth match, the fastballs down the middle with match questions always work.
Do you have a favorite Australian Open interview or a favorite moment?
I think the first year that I did it was 2005 when Marat Safin beat Leighton Hewitt. And he beat Roger Federer, saving match points in the semifinals. And I interviewed him after that match, and he was so flummoxed from the effort and sort of just couldn't believe he'd won that I asked him a question. And he just went blank, and I said, "Do you need a hug?" And so me and the big Russian hugged it out, and then he kind of reset, and then he was back to his normal hilarious self. So those kind of moments you don't prepare for because you expect they're going to answer your question, but you have to be ready to ad-lib and figure out ways to the next spot. And Marat was a perfect foil for that one.
That's great. I should have asked him about that. We had him on Hall of Fame Live last week. We talked about that match. We did not get to the hug, though. I'm upset now.
It was more memorable for me.
I'm sure it was fun to watch for the fans as well. And speaking of, we have another fan question for you here from Patricia on Facebook. She is curious to know what your music tastes are and what you're listening to these days, which is interesting for those who don't know. Music is a big part of your life.
Yeah, I love music. I've been a huge music fan, and I hack around at it a little bit as a player too. But my music tastes have changed a lot over the years. I love the new bands. That's sort of a passion for me. So bands like Wildorado that are coming up that many may not have heard of. I'm digging that. I still like bands like Pearl Jam that are putting out great music today. But, I've got a hip-hop side. I've got a country side. Some taste that I really was much more rock and alternative focused until probably the last 15 years or so. And then I've just sort of expanded my palette. Still haven't gotten to jazz. Still haven't gotten to classical. But expanding the palette through the beauty of things like Apple Music and Spotify, it's awesome to search.
Well, there's still time, Jim. Perhaps we'll do a 1-year check-in, and we'll check in on your jazz.
Sounds good.
No, we so appreciate you joining us today. I want to wrap up with one more question, Jim. We have some kids who join us for these live broadcasts, in particular our Team Fame NJTL program kids. I'm curious if one of those kids decided, hey, I would love to maybe shoot for a career in professional tennis. What vision, what advice would you have for them going forward?
Well, I think make sure that it's your passion and not someone else's, because if it's your passion, you will do everything in your power to get the most out of yourself. And even if you don't make it, and let's be honest, the chances are pretty small for any one of us to make it as a professional athlete, it's still a great journey. And you still learn a lot about yourself. And there's still so many great people that you can meet through the sport and things that you can learn. And it can lead to a lot of great outcomes. And I saw that time and time again from people that I was at Bollettieri's with or in junior tennis with that I'm still in touch with, who have found so much happiness and joy in their lives and oftentimes big success in business because of the things that they have learned through tennis. So if it's your passion, give it everything you got. You won't regret it.
Well, Jim, once again, thank you. I know you're sitting outside in steamy Orlando, Florida. I hope you're staying well hydrated out there, but we appreciate your time.
Blair, great to see you. Thanks. Stay safe, stay well, and the same to all of our tennis family out there. And hopefully we'll be back soon.
That's right. Hope to see you in person soon. I will take that. Jim, thank you. And you can join us once again next week at 3 o'clock Eastern on Wednesday with Lindsay Davenport. So we'll see you then.